7 people are dead. More than 100,000 homes are sitting in total darkness, and neither of these disasters is over yet. This past weekend, the United States was fighting 2 completely different water catastrophes at the exact same time, 4,000 miles apart from each other. And if you were only half paying attention to the news, there's a real chance you only heard about one of them. So let's fix that right now. By the end of this, you're going to understand exactly what happened in both places, why each one was so much more dangerous than it sounded on the surface, and why the people responsible for keeping Americans safe are still, as of today, not finished responding. Let's start in the Midwest, because this is the story that broke first and broke hardest. On August 11th, 2026, a system of severe storms started rolling across the state of Indiana. What came next, over the following 4 days, wasn't just a flood in the ordinary sense of the word. It was a record-obliterating, infrastructure-breaking event that quietly rewrote what people thought was physically possible for a Midwestern summer. The National Weather Service confirmed that some parts of Indiana picked up more than 11 inches of rain in the span of just a couple of days. The single highest total on record came out of Newcastle, Indiana, where the gauge measured 11.43 inches. Greensburg wasn't far behind, with more than 7 inches falling there as well. Those are big numbers on their own, but raw rainfall totals only tell you part of the story. The part that actually matters is what happens when that rain lands on ground that has nowhere left to absorb it. And that's exactly what happened here. Indiana had already been soaked by repeated rounds of heavy storms in the days leading into August 11th. The soil wasn't just damp. It was saturated, completely full, with no capacity left to take in anything more. This is the single most important idea for understanding everything that followed. When soil is already saturated, the percentage of new rainfall that actually soaks in collapses toward 0, and the percentage that runs straight off into the nearest river climbs toward 100%. So when those 11 inches fell on Indiana between August 11th and the 13th, they didn't behave like 11 inches of rain spread out over the landscape. They behaved like 11 inches of water poured directly into the river channel. Every drop went straight into the system with nowhere else to go. The White River took the brunt of it. Flooding concentrated hard along the main stem of the river, running from Hamilton County down through the northern suburbs of Indianapolis. Multiple river systems across the state went under flood warnings at the same time. Drone footage from NBC News showed entire streets in the Ravenswood neighborhood of Indianapolis completely swallowed by water, cars submerged up to their rooftops, floodwater rising to the front doors of homes while residents paddled through their own neighborhoods in kayaks and rowboats just to get around. That's not a flood in the way most of us picture one. That's an inland sea that appeared inside a major American city almost overnight, and then the White River did something that no living person had ever seen it do. At the gauge station in Anderson, the river crested on Friday at 24.93 feet. The old record at that station, set all the way back in 1913, was 23.66 feet. That record had survived for 113 years. It survived 2 world wars, the Great Depression, the construction of the interstate highway system, the moon landing, and every single flood that came through Indiana in between. None of them touched it. Until Friday, August 14th, 2026, when the river beat that century-old mark by 1.33 feet. And it wasn't isolated to Anderson. Upstream at Noblesville, roughly 15 miles north of Indianapolis, the river also broke its own 1913 record, cresting near 24.5 feet against an old mark of 23.8. Here's the detail that turns this from a big headline number into something genuinely extraordinary. The flood that set that 1913 record wasn't a summer event. It was a spring flood driven by a combination of melting snow and heavy rain. In late March of that year, a massive storm system dumped 6 to 11 inches of rain across Indiana, Ohio, and parts of Pennsylvania and Kentucky. And it landed on top of a snowpack that was already melting into ground that was still partially frozen in places. That's about as brutal a hydrological setup as you can build. Frozen, saturated ground, melting snow with nowhere to go, and a wall of rain stacked on top of it. That flood killed somewhere between 100 and 200 people in Indiana alone, left more than 250,000 people across the Midwest homeless, and it became the second deadliest flood in the history of the United States. For over a century, it was the yardstick. Every flood that came after it in Indiana was measured against that one number. The flood of August 2026 beat that record with rainfall alone. No snowpack, no frozen ground, no spring melt already sitting in the river before the storms even arrived. August is supposed to be the season when a river has the most capacity to absorb a shock, when the ground is warm and there's no snowmelt working against it. The 1913 flood had every possible hydrological disadvantage stacked in its favor. Every factor that could make a flood historically severe was already present before a single drop of rain fell. And in 2026, a summer thunderstorm sequence walked straight past it. That's the detail that should genuinely stop you, because it means every flood map, every insurance rate calculation, every levee height, every drainage system, every road built with an understanding of where water goes in a worst-case scenario, all of it was built around a number from 1913. On Friday, that number stopped being the ceiling. What caused this isn't exotic. It's not some once-in-a-generation atmospheric fluke. It comes down to a stall, a frontal boundary set up across the Midwest, and instead of moving through the way weather systems normally do, it just stopped. Hot, humid air pushing north from the Gulf of Mexico ran into cooler air holding steady to the north, and the two essentially canceled each other out, pinning the front in place. At the same time, a high-pressure system sitting over the Gulf worked like a conveyor belt, pumping warm, moisture-loaded air directly north into that stalled boundary. Every disturbance riding along the jet stream fired off a fresh round of thunderstorms along that same front. And because those storm cells were tracking perpendicular to the boundary itself, they crossed the same counties over and over and over again. Meteorologists have a name for this. They call it training, and the image is exactly what it sounds like. Storm cells running down the same track one after another, like train cars on the same rail line, each one dumping its full load of rain on ground the previous cell had just finished soaking. A single storm that crosses a county in 40 minutes leaves behind a manageable amount of water. That same storm regenerating over the same county for 2 straight days leaves behind a catastrophe. And notice that the intensity of any one storm cell doesn't have to be unusual for this to happen. The only thing that has to go wrong is the geometry, whether the boundary is moving or not. And the 1913 flood, the one that held the record for over a century, had the exact same failure mode, a storm system that stalled, 113 years apart. And Indiana got hit by the same atmospheric mechanism both times. Now let's talk about the people, because that's what actually matters here. As of the latest confirmed count, at least 7 people have died in the flooding and storms across Indiana. That number was 5 on Friday, climbed to 6 by Saturday, and was revised up to 7 by Sunday. It should still be treated as a number that could move. Among those killed was an 18-year-old named Matthew, an incoming freshman at Purdue University. He and 3 friends went into the Mississippi River on Wednesday, right as the flooding was beginning. His body was recovered by the Delaware County Sheriff's Office 2 days later. A 4-year-old boy in Jennings County was killed when a tree came crashing through the roof of his home during strong winds. A 58-year-old woman died in Lake County. An 86-year-old woman died in Porter County. A 32-year-old man died in LaPorte County. A 31-year-old man died in Henry County. 7 people, ordinary people in ordinary Indiana towns, killed by water and wind that nobody expected to turn this severe. The scale of the emergency response gives you a sense of just how bad it got. The Indianapolis Fire Department alone pulled 95 people and 45 pets out of floodwaters by late Saturday afternoon. That's one city's fire department in a single afternoon. Rescue crews and welfare checks were running in Fayette County. An entire senior mobile home community in Tipton County had to be evacuated. National Guard soldiers worked alongside local first responders on high water recovery operations throughout Indianapolis. Officials in Hamilton County described the flooding there as historic. The president of the Hamilton County Board of Commissioners summed up the moment on Sunday morning with a line that says more than any statistic could. It's a good morning because it isn't raining and the water is receding. That's the bar right now, not raining and the water going down. That's what counts as a good day after a week like this one. The governor of Indiana declared a statewide disaster emergency and formally requested federal aid. President Trump approved an emergency declaration for the state, and FEMA confirmed that federal disaster assistance was becoming available. But there's a distinction buried in that sentence that matters enormously. And it's the kind of detail that gets glossed over in most coverage. An emergency declaration and a major disaster declaration are not the same thing. An emergency declaration is the smaller, faster tool. It frees up to $5 million in federal resources, and it's built for immediate response, moving people, moving equipment, keeping operations running while the water is still up. $5 million is a response budget. It is not a recovery budget. It is definitely not a rebuilding budget for a river corridor that just set a 113-year crest record running through the second largest metro area in the state. The bigger tool is a major disaster declaration, and that's what actually unlocks individual assistance for families whose homes were destroyed, along with public assistance for rebuilding infrastructure. Getting there requires joint preliminary damage assessments across every affected county, and as of the most recent update, those assessments were still being completed. Until those numbers come back, $5 million is what's on the table, and against a flood that just broke a record from 1913, that number is not going to be enough. And the flooding didn't stay contained to Indiana. By Sunday night and into Monday, the same system pushed heavy rain eastward. Communities in Ohio got hit next, with firefighters in Perry County making more than 50 water rescues over the course of Saturday night into Sunday morning. One woman was found stranded on top of her own car in floodwater in Thorne Township. The threat kept spreading into West Virginia and Kentucky. What started out as an Indiana story turned into a regional one, a Midwest water crisis that kept traveling east right along with the weather system that caused it. Now let's go 4,000 miles in the other direction, because at the exact same time, a completely different kind of disaster was unfolding in the Pacific. Hurricane Lala strengthened from a tropical storm into a Category 1 hurricane on Saturday, August 15th, 2026, as it approached Hawaii's Big Island with sustained winds of 75 miles per hour. The National Hurricane Center used the phrase life-threatening conditions to describe what was coming before the storm's closest approach. Technically, Lala never made an official landfall. Its eye passed just south of the Big Island without ever crossing the coastline. Forecasters had noted beforehand that a direct hit would have marked Hawaii's first hurricane landfall in more than 30 years. That didn't happen. There's no official landfall point on the record. Officially, Lala grazed the island. It didn't strike it, and it still managed to sweep occupied homes completely off their foundations. In the heaviest bands, rain fell at rates of 3 to 5 inches per hour. Not per day, per hour. One day total surpassed 2 feet of rain in some spots. Up in the mountains of the Big Island, some areas received more than 3.5 feet of rainfall, over 42 inches total. Maui's mountainous regions saw up to 2 feet as well. Forecasters actually revised their maximum storm total forecast upward from an initial estimate of 25 inches to a new range of 30 to 35 inches as the storm slowed down while passing over the islands. And that detail matters just as much here as it did in Indiana. When a storm slows down, the rain keeps piling onto the same location instead of moving on. It's the same underlying physics that stalled the front over the Midwest. Sustained rainfall concentrated over a fixed area, just playing out this time through a tropical cyclone that happened to lose forward speed at exactly the wrong moment. Hawaii County's mayor, Kimo Alama, said publicly that several occupied homes may have been swept clean off their foundations in the Nalehu and Wood Valley areas. He described what he called a river of water tearing through the Nalehu area, washing away, in his words, quite a lot. Hawaii County Civil Defense launched a joint search and rescue operation, pulling in county resources, the Hawaii National Guard, and the United States Coast Guard, all working to reach people who had called 911 for help, but couldn't be located because flooding and fallen boulders had blocked the roads. Picture that for a second. Search and rescue teams working in the dark, in rushing water, navigating around boulders in the road, trying to reach people who called for help and then went silent because the cell towers had already gone down. One person was killed in a storm-related vehicle crash on the Big Island. Over 100 homes were damaged or destroyed on Hawaii Island alone. 6 bridges were destroyed or nearly destroyed in the Kau area. Hawaii's governor, Josh Green, described what he saw in parts of the South as utter devastation. A section of the highway near Pahala collapsed overnight into Sunday, cutting off critical access to an area that's home to one of the region's only hospitals. What used to be a road is now, in effect, a brand new waterfall. Hawaiian Airlines canceled 52 flights outright, and around 190 flights across the state were either canceled or delayed on Saturday alone. Every state office, county office, school, court, and judiciary office in the affected areas was closed on Monday. And then there's the power situation, which is really where the full weight of Hawaii's geography becomes impossible to ignore. By Saturday night, more than 88,000 Hawaiian Electric customers were without power. By Sunday morning, that number had climbed past 178,000. By Monday morning, roughly 117,000 customers were still sitting in the dark across 3 islands, with 41,000 of those on Hawaii Island alone, concentrated mostly in Puna, North and South Kona, North and South Kohala, Hamakua, and South Hilo. And the utility issued a warning that should make anyone outside Hawaii pause. Some of these outages could last months. Not days, months. Here's why that word isn't an exaggeration. Hawaii's islands aren't connected to each other on a shared power grid, and they're definitely not connected to any mainland network. When a storm knocks out transmission lines on the continental United States, utilities can call for mutual aid, and convoys of repair trucks roll in overnight from neighboring states. That's the system that gets most continental outages fixed within days. That system simply does not exist for Hawaii. There is no road from the mainland to the islands. Every repair crew, every replacement utility pole, every transformer, every spool of transmission cable is either already sitting on that island, or it has to get there by ship or by plane. Hawaiian Electric requested help from partner utilities on the mainland, and roughly 100 crew members were expected to arrive by Tuesday, with work set to begin Wednesday. They had to be flown in. 2 of the Big Island's largest independent power producers, Puna Geothermal Venture and Hamaka Energy Partners, were both disconnected from the grid because of storm damage. Wind energy providers were knocked offline too. A 42-mile stretch of transmission line along the Hamakua coast needed full assessment, after falling trees took down multiple poles and support structures across the entire corridor. That's not a scattered outage here and there. That's a backbone failure. And on an island, a backbone failure doesn't get solved by borrowing trucks from the utility 2 states over. The knock-on effects of an extended power outage on an island compound fast. Losing power takes down water systems that rely on electric pumps, and the Department of Water Supply had to issue an essential needs-only notice, limiting water use to drinking, cooking, and basic hygiene. An extended outage takes down refrigeration for food. It takes down refrigeration for medication, including insulin and other drugs that can't tolerate heat. It takes down the cell towers people rely on to call 911 when they're trapped, the very same towers emergency managers need in order to find them and coordinate a rescue. Generators can cover some of that gap for a while, and then they run out of fuel, and fuel has to arrive by ship too. None of this is unique to Hawaii in kind. Every island community anywhere in the world faces the same basic vulnerability. It's only unique here in degree because in Hawaii there genuinely is no road out. Governor Green estimated the storm caused hundreds of millions of dollars in damage statewide, an estimate made on Sunday while helicopter and drone assessments were still underway on both Hawaii Island and Oahu. That number is going to climb. It always does. So now, both events, same week. What actually connects them and what does it mean? Meteorologically, these two disasters have absolutely nothing to do with each other. There's no shared storm system, no common atmospheric front, no single weather pattern linking the American Midwest to the Central Pacific. One was a stalled frontal boundary. The other was a tropical cyclone. They are entirely separate weather events, and anyone trying to connect them scientifically is stretching the truth. But they did their damage through the exact same mechanism. Neither one was primarily a wind story. Both were water volume stories, and both of them blew straight through benchmarks that local infrastructure had been built around, in Indiana's case, for more than a century. There's also a much bigger story buried in here about how warning systems work, where they fail, and why an accurate forecast doesn't automatically translate into a safe outcome. The National Weather Service office in Indianapolis had upgraded the White River outlook from moderate to major flood severity days before the crest even arrived, with flood warnings that were written to remain in effect out to August 17th. Forecasters said clearly in advance that the worst hadn't hit yet. The National Hurricane Center used the words life-threatening ahead of Lala's closest approach to Hawaii. Hawaiian Electric warned customers ahead of time that extended outages were possible. In both cases, the forecast was right. The science worked, the warnings went out on time, and people still died. Homes still got destroyed. 100,000 people are still sitting without power right now as this is being put together. That gap between an accurate forecast and a safe outcome is not a forecasting problem. It's an infrastructure problem. It's a flood map problem. It's a problem about where people are allowed to build homes and under what conditions. It's a problem of mobile home communities sitting in floodplains with no margin for elevation and no vehicle on hand to evacuate. It's a problem with a wind-based hurricane category system that tells you almost nothing useful about a rainfall rate of 5 inches an hour hitting steep volcanic slopes above a coastal town. It's a problem of a public that hears Category 1 and reasonably assumes that means survivable, because Category 1 is the lowest rung on the scale, and survivable is a completely reasonable read of the lowest rung, right up until 5 inches of rain an hour starts running down a mountainside into your neighborhood. The Saphir-Simpson scale measures exactly one thing: sustained wind speed. Category 1 covers winds from 74 to 95 miles per hour. That's the entire message the category communicates. It told the public almost nothing about the actual hazard that ended up killing someone and destroying homes in Hawaii, which was extraordinary rainfall hitting steep volcanic terrain that forces moist air upward and wrings it out, producing rainfall rates far beyond what that same storm would generate over flat land or open ocean. A hurricane that never even technically made landfall did all of that damage. The category rating wasn't wrong exactly. It was just measuring the wrong thing entirely. And back in Indiana, a severe thunderstorm warning is about as routine and alert as exists anywhere in the American Midwest. People who've lived there their whole lives have heard that alert hundreds of times without much consequence. And a stalled line of otherwise routine thunderstorms just knocked down the most famous flood record in the state's history. In both places, the public-facing warning language communicated something close to the opposite of the true threat level. There's one more piece of context worth stating clearly before we get to where things stand today. A 100-year flood does not mean a flood that happens once every 100 years. That's a common misunderstanding, and it's a dangerous one. A 100-year flood means a flood with a 1% chance of being equaled or exceeded in any given year. 2 of them can happen in back-to-back years without anything being statistically wrong with that math. But that 1% figure is calculated from the historical gauge record, and that calculation assumes the past is a reliable sample of the future. Every floodplain map, every levee height, every culvert diameter, every flood insurance rate map in Indiana, and a huge share of local building codes all sit downstream of that one assumption. When a record that held for 113 years falls to a mechanism that didn't even produce the original record, meaning rainfall alone beating rainfall combined with snowmelt, the assumption itself is what's actually being tested now. So where do things stand as of today? In Indiana, floodwaters along the White River are receding, but the damage assessment is really just getting started. Officials in Hamilton County said Sunday morning that the water was finally starting to pull back. Recovery work along the White River corridor remains active right now. The confirmed death toll stands at 7, and it may still move as water continues to recede and search operations continue. The joint preliminary damage assessments that determine whether Indiana gets upgraded from an emergency declaration to a full major disaster declaration are underway, and that's the next concrete thing to watch. Until those assessments come back with a dollar figure, $5 million is the federal number on the table against a flood that just broke a 113-year-old record straight through the second largest metro corridor in the state. And the flooding threat has continued spreading east, with Ohio communities hit hard on Sunday night. The system isn't finished moving. In Hawaii, roughly 117,000 customers remained without power as of Monday morning. Crews managed to repair 3 major transmission lines on Sunday, which counts as one of the first real steps toward rebuilding the backbone of the grid. About 100 mainland crew members are expected to arrive Tuesday to begin work Wednesday. Damage assessments by helicopter and drone are continuing on both Hawaii Island and Oahu. Over 100 homes are damaged or destroyed. 6 bridges are destroyed or nearly destroyed in the Kau area. The highway collapse near Pahala is still cutting off access to a hospital. All schools and government offices remained closed Monday. The governor's damage estimate of hundreds of millions of dollars is expected to rise. For context on just how unusual this is for Hawaii, the last hurricane landfall the state experienced was Hurricane Iniki. Back on September 11th, 1992, a Category 4 storm that struck Kauai killed 7 people and caused roughly $3.1 billion in damage at the time. That was nearly 34 years ago. Most people currently living on the Big Island have never lived through a hurricane in their lifetime. Preparedness fades over a gap that long, and Lala tested that reality without ever technically making landfall at all. Both of these disasters are still unfolding right now. Both recovery timelines are measured in weeks, not days. Both events blew through numbers that were supposed to hold. The assumptions built into levees, the assumptions built into flood maps, the historical records people relied on, the category scales, and what the public reads into them. And in both places, the people who actually live there are waking up to a world where the old numbers simply don't apply anymore, where the benchmark they built their lives around, the assumption of where the water would stop, turned out to be wrong. The United States fought 2 federal-scale disasters at the same time this past weekend. 7 people dead in Indiana, 1 person dead in Hawaii, 100,000 homes still without power, dozens of homes gone completely, an 18-year-old who should have been starting college in a matter of weeks, a 4-year-old who never got the chance to grow up, a grandfather somewhere checking the water line on his own walls, a county commissioner for whom a good morning now simply means the rain has stopped. Neither of these stories is finished. The water is going down in Indiana. The power is slowly coming back on in Hawaii, but the reckoning is only just beginning. The damage assessments, the insurance disputes, the fights over flood maps and building codes and what gets rebuilt where and under what new rules, those conversations are going to take years. The infrastructure decisions that come out of this week will take decades to play out. And the numbers that just got broken will either get written into the next generation of maps, floodplains, and design standards, or they'll get ignored. And somewhere down the line, in 30 or 50 or 70 years, someone is going to stand in front of a camera and tell an audience that another record just fell. A record that traces back to 2026, the year 2 disasters hit America at the exact same time. We'll keep tracking both of these stories as they develop. The damage assessments, the recovery totals, the death toll if it moves again, the power restoration timeline in Hawaii, and whether Indiana's emergency declaration gets upgraded into something bigger. This story is far from over,